It is time now to evaluate who the big fat losers are from the 2025 NHL Draft. And if you want some positivity, hit the link in the description to see who the winners are from this year's draft. But we got to start with the losers. And the losers are all of us yesterday who had to sit through the first round of the NHL Draft. I assume you know this already, but yesterday the NHL did their first draft decentralized. Round one was the big production that's on television, and it's a decentralized draft, which means all of the teams, their war rooms, the general managers, and all the scouts are back in their home markets, whether it's at their practice facility or in the stadium. A lot of them did a setup in like their dressing room, which was pretty cool to see. All of that is back in their home markets, and they are feeding their picks to the NHL, who is doing the big production down in LA. And how the show worked on Friday night was Gary Bettman was on stage as the host of the whole thing. He would go up to the stage, he would call on a celebrity that represent whatever city was drafting, and then that celebrity would make the pick for the draft. Then the player who was drafted would walk up to the stage, they would get their jersey, they would go over to this cave corner place where they would talk on Zoom to the team that drafted them, the general manager and whatever head coach or scouts or whoever wanted to be on the Zoom call to the player that they just drafted. They would have a little interview there, a little back and forth, which felt a lot like when your parents would put you on the phone with like your grandma, and it's like grandma's birthday, and they're like, wish your grandma a happy birthday. And you got to talk to your grandma for like 5 seconds on the phone. It was very awkward. And then from there, they would move the player over who got drafted to a next interview. Up in Canada, the next set of interviews were done with Ailish Forfar on Sportsnet, and she would sit there and talk to the player, and then you get that little interview, and then they throw it back to the draft panel who do some analysis on the player and all that. And in between, they're doing all these highlights and everything. The whole thing took so long. The celebrity didn't need to be there. Like, they didn't need that whole part of the show. Some teams had some cool representatives up there, but like, it wasn't necessary. It was cool to see some of the people. It was just really unnecessary to the whole production of the show. And then you had that little Zoom call like I was talking about. Didn't need that ever. Nobody needed to see that. And there was a moment later rounds that we got into like the 20 area. It stopped working, and some teams didn't get to talk to the players, and the draft was moving along perfectly fine when it wasn't working. But then when it was working, it was just a slog to get through. The whole thing, 32 picks, took about 4.5 hours. Myself, Adam Wilde, and Steve Dangle streamed the whole thing live on the SDPN YouTube channel. Go back and watch that live replay if you want to see us slowly descending into madness. At one point, Adam read a name from somebody who sent a super chat in, and he read the name Lick Masak. Yes, it was a fake name. Yes, he got caught. It was hilarious. Great moment. He got D's nuts. He got Lick Masacked. It was hilarious. And then Steve Dangle ate wasabi at one point because we got a bunch of super chats, and he was just fed up and ate wasabi. It was unbelievable stream. We had a lot of fun, but it was painful to get through because the NHL continually fails at this production thing. And I saw some arguments on Twitter about how like the GMs voted for this. All of the GMs, the majority of them, wanted this setup where it's decentralized. But the setup's like, okay, it's fine to do everything remotely. What we're complaining about is the production of the television show. The television show sucked. It wasn't a good show. It wasn't entertaining. It was too long. And it was on a Friday night when I assume the majority of people aren't locked in their homes on a Friday night for 4.5 hours to watch the entirety of the draft on a long weekend in Canada. I know July 1st is on Tuesday, but most people have the Monday off. So like, it's a long weekend. Most people don't want to sit for 4.5 hours to watch the draft. It was a bad production. It was a bad idea. And I think the biggest losers are all of us that sat through that night number one. Now on to the actual teams who are losers coming out of the 2025 NHL Draft. Number one loser on my board out of the teams this year is the Colorado Avalanche for drafting Francesco Del Elche at 77 in this year's draft. He was projected coming into this draft as a 4th or a 5th round pick. And why this is exceptionally egregious to reach on this player. One, he's only 6'1". In this draft, the big thing is getting size, whether that's in your forwards or your defenseman who you're drafting. They drafted a 6'1" defenseman who's left shot, so not a right shot D, the thing everybody wants, and he's only $170. On top of all of that, you reached, he's smaller, left shot, he's an overager. This is his third time in the draft. He's 2 times undrafted, but last season he had a really good season at UMass and surprised some scouts, and he got back into the draft, and he was projected to be a 4th or a 5th rounder. And the Colorado Avalanche looked at this player and said, he's been passed on twice, he's improved a lot, and we're going to reach on him because we have so little picks in this year's draft. They only had 3, and this is the highest one they're coming out of the draft with. It is questionable decision making to me to reach on an overager. There were a lot of prospects left in the draft at the time. They obviously didn't think that Del Elche would get to 118 where their next pick was. I think it's a little odd to take a giant swing like this when you have so little picks. The idea behind it, I guess, which I can see, is that he's probably the most NHL ready player you can draft because he's 20 years old and older than everybody else in the draft who's like first time up in the draft. He's been passed on to his 3rd draft, 20 years old. He's going to be closer to the NHL level than everybody else, but that doesn't mean he's good. And we'll see. We'll see if their philosophy behind this makes sense. They're like, we're going to win. We want to win as quickly as possible. So let's get players who can help us win as quickly as possible. And that would be drafting an older player. We'll see how this pans out for Colorado. To me, they got to be one of the losers just because of the questionable decision-making there. Next up on my loser board, and you can kind of see the theme of how I'm breaking this thing out based on this team and why I think they're a loser. The Columbus Blue Jackets, who at the 20th overall pick took Pyotr Andreyanov, a goaltender out of Russia. And now Pyotr had a great season with CSKA Red Army Jr. He was fantastic. He had a .942. He was 23-6-6. He had 3 shutouts. Unreal goaltender. My only problem with this is he's probably the 1 or 2 goalie prospect in the draft. And it's a reach to take him at 20th overall. Most mock drafts had him in the 2nd and 3rd round. It was a real stretch to take him at 20. Columbus didn't have a pick from 20 to 76, so they clearly thought they were going to lose Andreyanov between those picks. But to me, it's not about drafting the player you really, really want. You got to draft the best player available. And at 20, for a guy who's supposed to go in the 2nd or 3rd round and is a goaltender, there were just so many better prospects available who had more potential than Andreyanov. And it screams to me that they're drafting for need and position rather than just taking the best player available. In a correct world, you don't want the Columbus Blue Jackets to reach on a goaltender. You want them to just take, hey, this is the best prospect at 20. We are going to take this prospect. And this isn't Andreyanov. There were many prospects who had higher potential than him at that position. And one thing I really don't like about just the scouting report is how undersized he is for a goaltender. He's only 18, so he can grow, but the way goaltending is going, he's 6 foot, and that is not ideal for the future of goaltending. You want a 6'8" dude who's super flexible. That's the kind of goaltending I would want for my team, and Andreyanov doesn't scream that. He screams a really great positional Russian goaltender. He's not big, but he's got great positioning. We'll see what he develops into. I think Columbus has got to be a loser for this giant reach with their 2nd highest draft pick. And on top of this, they fell short in the Noah Dobson sweepstakes. They tried to be the one who came away with Noah Dobson from the New York Islanders, and they got outbid by the Montreal Canadiens. They're on the cusp of doing something really good, but they need to make one of those deals to get it done. And coming out of the draft, things are just kind of steady as it goes for the Blue Jackets. Jackson Smith was a good draft pick at 14, but there's nothing that screams franchise-altering defenseman that they got at 14. And then other than the 14th pick, Jackson Smith, and the 20th pick, Andreyanov, the goaltender, you got a bunch of maybes. They picked 76, 160, 173, and 198. Those are a bunch of maybes. They didn't have a lot of draft capital high up in the draft, and you need those if you're a franchise that's still rebuilding and on the come up, or you got to move those pieces for pieces that'll help you today. If you're the Blue Jackets, you believe that you're right there as a playoff team. So I'm not really happy with how the Blue Jackets are looking right now coming out of the draft, so they have to be my number 2 loser on this list. And lastly, my soft loser on this board, the Edmonton Oilers, for not using their draft capital to get something for today. The Edmonton Oilers picked 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 times in this draft, and I don't think they should have picked 5 times in this draft. I think some of those draft picks should not have come into their system. I get that you need prospects every year to refill the cabinet that you have for guys you've sent out, but the Edmonton Oilers need to win the Stanley Cup in the next couple of years. They need to prove to McDavid that they can win the Stanley Cup, and they need to do it, I think, in the next couple of years. And using your picks, to me, isn't the best strategy. I would have liked to see them come out with John Gibson added this weekend, and the Detroit Red Wings did that. And I don't know if any of these players they drafted are going to have an effect on their team in any of the near future. I don't assume so. These aren't high draft picks. And if any of this doesn't help you keep Connor McDavid, then you're losing the plot of your organization. I think it's really cool that they drafted Aiden Park at 223 in the draft, the second last pick, and he was in the building because he's a SoCal native. That was an awesome moment. So thank you, Edmonton, for giving me that moment on the television. That was cool. But soft loser for using all of your draft picks. You should have got a goaltender this weekend, and it's Saturday now, and you don't have a goaltender, and you haven't gotten any better to keep Connor McDavid. So soft loser, the Edmonton Oilers. Let me know if you got any teams who you're not really happy with how they performed on NHL Draft Weekend in the comments on the Jesse Blake Sports Report YouTube channel. And while you're there, hit like and subscribe. Thank you for being here. You could have been anywhere in the world, but chose to be watching or listening right now, and I appreciate you for that. Good night from Toronto.